Mom, help! We have no money or food. My mother-in-law took away everything from us. I saw my daughter, with whom I lost touch after she got married, for the first time in several years. I had believed she was living happily with her child, but I noticed a stark difference in her appearance compared to a few years ago, and she looked worn and battered. I began to suspect that my daughter had been mistreated by her in-laws all this time. Realizing this, I grabbed her hand, held my grandchild in my arm, and dashed away. All right, let's get out of here as soon as possible. After managing to escape to our home, my daughter burst into tears. Thank you, Mom. I really mean it. Thank you. We've finally escaped from Grandma's house. Thank you. My daughter was sobbing like a child, and my grandchild was overjoyed. Seeing them like this, I was relieved that I was able to help before it was too late. However, in the following days, her mother-in-law started causing a commotion. My daughter-in-law and grandchild were kidnapped. The culprit is her biological mother. My name is Presley. I'm a 56-year-old hairdresser. I run a beauty salon at home with my 25-year-old daughter, Elsie, who is also a hairdresser. I divorced shortly after giving birth to my daughter, and since then, I've been a single mother, raising her on my own. We've been living together, just the two of us, from her early childhood, and we've spent a lot of time together, so my daughter and I would argue often. I would say that we are so close that we argue. My relationship with my daughter remained the same, even when she started working with me, and we've run our salon quite harmoniously. My beauty salon is small in scale, but fortunately, the number of customers who keep coming back to our salon to the point we can call them our regulars was increasing. Some of our regular customers even cared how we were doing every time they visited, and we were grateful for that. During this time, my daughter got close to a male regular customer and started dating him. He's a polite 31-year-old gentleman, and I had a good impression of him. While the age gap between him and my daughter concerned me a little, I thought his understanding nature might be a positive aspect. I was rooting for the relationship between them, who seemed to share a certain resemblance in their personalities. Their relationship progressed smoothly, and after about a year of dating, they got married. After they got married, my daughter left my beauty salon, moved out of my house, and started living with her husband at his family's house. Worried about how she would adapt to living with her in-laws, given that she had always lived with just me, I frequently contacted her. Elsie, how are you doing? Are you getting along with your mother-in-law? I'm okay. She's really kind to me, and I'm doing my best with the housework. Mom, you worry too much. According to my daughter, she was getting along well with her mother-in-law. Her voice was cheerful when she told me that, so I felt relieved for the time being. Before long, my daughter became pregnant. The following year, she gave birth to a healthy and lively baby girl named June. After giving birth, my daughter started coming to our house with June frequently. The newborn grandchild was tiny and adorable, truly a sight to behold, and our days were filled with joy. We believed these happy days would continue, but one day, tragedy struck. And that turned our lives upside down. It happened when my grandchild turned 1 year old. To our shock, my daughter's husband was involved in a traffic accident. He was injured pretty badly, and he passed away. My daughter was devastated by the sudden loss of her husband. I couldn't simply say cheer up to my daughter, who has lost her beloved partner and left behind with a young child. All I could do was gently stroke her back, offering solace. While I wished we could live together to provide more support, my daughter had married into her husband's family. I couldn't be there for her every day, which worried me, so I decided to at least maintain frequent contact to let her know I cared. However, since then, it became increasingly difficult to reach my daughter on her phone. Oh dear, she hasn't even read my message. She isn't answering calls either. I wonder if she is okay. In the past, when I sent a message, my daughter would reply by the end of day at the latest, but recently, several days passed with no indication that my messages had been even read. Furthermore, after a few days, she would send just a brief response, and she never answered the calls. It was so uncharacteristic for my daughter, who was talkative and punctual. I began to worry if she was struggling with her husband's death. So, I decided to call the home phone at their house. However, when her mother-in-law answered the phone, her attitude was curt, and she wouldn't pass the phone to my daughter. "Hello, is this Peggy? I'd like to speak with Elsie. She is at work. She's busy because she has to work as much as my son would have. If it's not urgent, please call back later." I tried calling at different times, but her mother-in-law hung up the phone each time, saying that she was too busy. I also told her that I wanted to visit my daughter on her day off, but she kept coming up with excuses and refused to let me see my daughter, so I couldn't check on my daughter's well-being in person. This situation continued for a while until one day, I started receiving messages from my daughter again. However, the content was different from before, filled with bitter and hurtful messages. "Why do you keep bothering me with calls and messages? Stop it. I never said this before, but because you were a single mother, I had to go through a lot. Why did you even get divorced? I've been always embarrassed because I didn't have a father. It's terrible that I'm going to make my daughter go through the same thing." I was shocked by the various resentful and rejecting words in the messages from my daughter. As my daughter pointed out, I was indeed a single mother and couldn't rely on my parents, so I've made my daughter compromise in various situations, be it in our daily life or during events, since she was little, and I was aware of that. Thus, her harsh messages weighed heavily on my heart, and I began to feel increasingly cornered, wondering if she was suffering because of me. To top it off, I received a message saying, "My mother-in-law is kinder and more beautiful, and she treats me like a real daughter. She's so different from you, who isn't here for me when I'm going through a tough time," and I was devastated. I used to believe we had built a good relationship, despite our occasional arguments, but maybe that was just my perspective. I could hear the sound of the trust that had existed between my daughter and me crumbling, and my world turned dark. If my daughter is rejecting me to this extent, perhaps it's better if I don't contact her anymore. It's not so much for her sake, but for my own. I can't bear to be further denied by my daughter. I was feeling that way, and I couldn't contact my daughter after that. As a result, we drifted apart over the years, and about 3 years had passed. One day, as my grandchild's 4th birthday was approaching, and I really wanted to give her some birthday money that year, I decided to reach out to her mother-in-law. I had hardly been in touch with her over the past 3 years, so I nervously made the call. "June's birthday is coming soon, and I'd like to give her some birthday money," I hesitantly said, expecting the usual cold response from her mother-in-law. However, to my surprise, she responded with a cheerful voice. "Oh, that's perfect. We have a family memorial service coming up, so you should come too. You can bring June's birthday money with you at that time." Even though my daughter doesn't like me at all anymore, I still yearn to have a proper conversation with her. I hoped that, during the memorial service, I might find a moment to talk with her, even if it was just for a short while. With these hopes in mind, I decided to visit her in-laws' house, for the first time in several years. Then came the day of the memorial service. As I nervously entered her in-laws' house, I saw my daughter and grandchild for the first time in years. My grandchild had grown considerably, and it brought tears to my eyes. I desperately wanted to rush to my grandchild and embrace her, but her mother-in-law, standing alongside my daughter, insisted that we should first participate in the memorial service, and guided me to the hall, where the memorial service would take place. Meanwhile, my daughter avoided looking in my direction, keeping her face turned away from me, and stayed close to her mother-in-law. My grandchild was standing quietly next to my daughter, holding a teddy bear in her arms with great care. I was sad to realize once again the depth of the rift between my daughter and me, as she didn't look at me or speak to me at all. After all, my daughter probably hates me so much that she no longer wants to talk to me or see my face. My grandchild, having last seen me when she was just over 1 year old, likely doesn't remember me. However, no matter how much my daughter dislikes me, she is still my precious daughter, and my grandchild is my precious first grandchild. I couldn't bring myself to dislike them, and I eagerly sought any opportunity to talk to them. Unexpectedly, that chance came sooner than I anticipated. When I arrived at the hall for the memorial service and took my seat, I casually scanned the room. To my surprise, my daughter, who had silently taken a seat, looking down in the relatives section away from me, hurriedly approached me with my grandchild when her mother-in-law momentarily left her seat to greet other relatives. As I was at a loss for words, because I was stunned by my daughter's sudden action, she whispered to me, "Mom, help! We don't have money or anything to eat. My mother-in-law took away everything from us." What? As soon as my daughter, who I thought that hated me, spoke to me for the first time in a few years, she told me something I had never expected. My mind went blank, and I inadvertently stared at her face. When I looked closely at her, she appeared visibly worn out, and in tatters compared to several years ago. The happy demeanor she had shortly after giving birth to her child was nowhere to be found. Her desperate expression, as she spoke to me, left no room for doubt. Perhaps my daughter had been mistreated at her in-laws' house all this time. Could it be that the many harsh messages she had sent me were not her true feelings, but something she had been forced to say by her in-laws? Realizing this, I felt a rush of blood draining from my entire body. I don't deserve to be a mother, as I didn't notice my daughter's situation sooner. Why hadn't I realized that something was wrong when the tone of her messages changed? I blamed myself, but more than anything, I had to rescue my daughter and grandchild as soon as possible. Driven by this determination, I grabbed my daughter's hand, held my grandchild in my arm, and dashed to my car in the parking lot. "All right, we'll talk later. First, let's get out of here as soon as possible." We were running toward the car, and we were almost there when we heard her mother-in-law's angry shouts from behind. "Wait! Where do you think you're going, you little thief?" As I opened the car lock, I glanced behind me, and I saw her mother-in-law approaching with a demonic expression. Her appearance, to say the most, was far from the kind and beautiful mother portrayed in the messages that my daughter had sent to me. This was indeed her true nature, and it was clear that my daughter had been mistreated by her all along. "Elsie, get in quickly! Hold on tight!" Perhaps my daughter was frightened by her mother-in-law's shouting, and she momentarily hesitated, so I pushed her into the car and floored the gas pedal. Her mother-in-law was chasing after us with a contorted face in anger, shouting something at us, but she couldn't keep up with the speed of the car, and before long she was out of sight. As we have managed to escape from her mother-in-law before she caught us, I let out a big sigh of relief. Phew! We managed to get away somehow. "Elsie, are you okay?" Turning around to check on my daughter and grandchild in the back seat, I asked. My daughter, who had been expressionless until then, burst into tears, with her face crumpled. "Thank you, Mom. I really mean it, thank you. We've finally escaped from Grandma's house. Thank you." My daughter was crying like a child, and my grandchild was overjoyed. Their emotional outbursts brought tears to my eyes, and I got out of the car to embrace them tightly. It seemed that they had been in an even more perilous situation than I had thought. While I was thinking about that, I held my daughter, who was sobbing, patting on her back to calm her down. After a while, when she had calmed down and seemed ready to talk, I asked her to explain the situation up to that point. It seems that after my daughter's husband passed away, my grandchild was taken hostage by her mother-in-law, and my daughter was forced to work like a slave, from morning till night. During the day, she was literally being exploited at a beauty salon owned by her mother-in-law's friend, and at night, she was responsible for all the housework. What's more, she mentioned that her mother-in-law took her money she earned from working at the salon. As for the harsh messages I had received from my daughter over the years, it turned out that they were sent by her mother-in-law. She tried to drive a wedge between us by sending harsh messages to me from my daughter's phone. I had fallen into her mother-in-law's trap, was devastated for nothing, and drifted apart from my daughter. After I heard the truth from my daughter, I was enraged by what her mother-in-law had done. Her mother-in-law not only made my daughter work hard, but also isolated her, and made us drifted apart, so she had no one to turn to. I couldn't forgive her. The more my daughter shared, the deeper the wrinkles between my brows got. As my daughter saw that I was trembling in anger, clenching my fists, she chuckled. "Thank you for getting angry for me, but don't worry, Mom. I haven't just been harassed, and I've been preparing to get back at her." It appeared, my daughter had secretly recorded evidence of her mistreatment, such as the abusive language her mother-in-law directed at her, in a diary. She had been enduring exploitation and exhaustion while quietly getting ready to fight back. In addition, she proudly patted the stuffed animal my grandchild had been holding and said, "Actually, I've hidden a voice recorder inside this stuffed animal. I've recorded every single insult from my mother-in-law. All of it." I had no idea that there was such a mechanism in the stuffed animal that my grandchild was holding. Even though she's my own daughter, I couldn't help but admire what a strong girl she was. While listening to my daughter talk about her plan for revenge against her mother-in-law, I asked about something that had been on my mind. "By the way, I wonder why your mother-in-law asked me to come to the memorial service. You've been married for years, but she had never invited me before. Elsie, do you know anything?" My daughter responded matter-of-factly, as I was puzzled. "Oh, that? Well, Mom, she wanted your money. You said you'd bring birthday money for June, right? But she wasn't planning to give that money to me. She was going to keep it for herself." She laughed and pointed out that such conversations were also recorded with the voice recorder. My daughter seemed far more at ease than she did right after we reunited. After I heard the full story from my daughter, we headed straight to the police station after escaping from her in-laws' house. Anticipating that her mother-in-law might perceive it as my daughter and grandchild being kidnapped by their real mother, we decided to file a report stating that my daughter and grandchild, who had been abused by her mother-in-law, ran away from her in-laws' house. To ensure that I wouldn't be treated as a kidnapper. The police officer in charge of our case was gentle and kind. When he said, "You've endured a lot until now," my daughter cried once again. After the police questioning was completed, I decided to have my daughter examined at the hospital, just in case, as I was worried, since she looked so thin. She was diagnosed with malnutrition, and she needed to visit hospital regularly to be treated gradually. Given that she hadn't had proper meals for years, my daughter's body required a gradual adjustment to eating regular meals again. Luckily, my grandchild was in good health, with no particular issues. I was a little bit relieved, as it seemed her mother-in-law hadn't abused this young child. As expected, after we left the police station for the hospital, her mother-in-law reportedly showed up at the police station. She said, "Despite the resistance, my daughter-in-law and grandchild were forcefully taken away by her real mother. They are being threatened by her and won't be able to fight back, so I want you to help me get them back." And she spoke ill of me extensively, desperately pleading to get my daughter and grandchild back. However, since we had already reported to the police and had gathered evidence of harassment, the police found our story more credible and chose to believe our account rather than her mother-in-law's. She was enraged at the police's decision. She said, "What? You believe what that woman says? Don't be foolish." She was furious and her face turned red as she lashed out, saying not to believe the words of the kidnapper. However, when the police officer mentioned that they have the evidence of her harassment against my daughter, she made a slip of the tongue. "It's her fault. It's only natural for a daughter-in-law to work for her husband's family. She wasn't doing it right, so I just didn't give her meals, that's all. I'm not guilty of anything." Her mother-in-law, upset by the attitude of the police, made a statement, admitting that she had been abusing my daughter. With her confession and the medical diagnosis of malnutrition from the hospital, the evidence was in place, and she was arrested for assault. Even until the end, she continued to insist that it was all wrong, that she was not at fault, and that her daughter-in-law who was incompetent, and her biological mother, who was a kidnapper, were at fault. Subsequently, she was ordered to pay a substantial amount of compensation. Since she received a suspended sentence, she didn't have to go behind bars. However, rumors spread throughout the neighborhood like wildfire, and the fact that she had been arrested for assault became common knowledge among everyone in the town. "I heard that lady over there got arrested. She'd been bullying her daughter-in-law for years, they say. Scary." As everybody in the neighborhood gave her a cold look, and she was excluded by everyone, she eventually left town. After visiting the hospital several times, my daughter made a full recovery. She regained her strength and was able to resume her normal daily life without any issues. My grandchild attends the nursery every day. "June didn't smile like this when we lived in my in-laws' house. My mother-in-law must have put her through some tough times. Thank you again for rescuing us, Mom," my daughter said earnestly, and smiled. Her face was fuller, and her complexion had improved compared to when she fled her in-laws' house. Seeing my daughter's face, I felt truly relieved. When my daughter was emotionally stabilized, she began working at my beauty salon again. With our strong bond rekindled, we are living together harmoniously as a family of 3.